And welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today, we welcome Scarlett Saitta. She's an osteopathic medical student. Today's Kevin MD article is The School Cafeteria Could Save American Medicine. Scarlett, welcome to the show.
It is a pleasure to be on here. Thank you so much for inviting me. So the article kind of came from a mix of personal experience and the process of realizing just how complex like real world change can be. I'm from a small Appalachia community where sadly chronic illness and food insecurity are just a part of everyday realities. The environment really shaped my desire to build those nutritional habits from childhood in underserved communities. So I drafted the American Farm to School Nutrition Act, which was a federal proposal. So I thought to myself, how come we can't just reallocate existing USDA funds to get healthier and locally sourced food into schools? But the more I learned, such as like from mentors from my school who have been doing policy for years, I realized the policy isn't just as simple as having a good idea. It's going to require a lot of collaboration with people who have been working on this for decades, such as like advocacy and specialty groups, which is why the article isn't just about the proposal, but a bit of a mindset shift. And the mindset shift has also developed a lot more since I wrote the article. And since I wrote the article, I thought of terms of what do I instead of thinking like what do I want to push, I more thought of how do I learn from this, since it could take literal years to learn about even one segment of a specialty in advocacy, since it's not really as simple as what maybe like the news makes it sound like. So now I'm meeting with farmers, food banks, and school nutrition leaders, so I can learn more deeply about the roadblocks in this field.
All right. So tell us about how your background, because in your article, you start with an anecdote about growing up in South Carolina and witnessing food insecurity firsthand. So tell me about how your early personal experiences, how did that inform and lead you to write the article and propose the act?
So I myself was fortunate enough to not grow up in a food insecure household, but I did know a lot of friends who did. So I had friends who during the week they ate 2/3 of their meals at school. I also had some who sadly didn't have any food on the weekends. But how it led me to for the article is a lot of the food that was served in the cafeteria. It was a really good thing that at least food was served, but it wasn't the most healthy. So I did later dive into and also notice, since I started working as a wellness coach later on, that people who really fortified and trained their taste to like healthier whole foods were a lot more likely to carry those on into adulthood. I also saw how like the lack of knowledge of what healthy food is, a lot of big food companies tended to prey on that. So for example, they would have like mac and cheese that said something like low or no sugar, but it would be very packed with a fat and very like processed material that would spike your blood sugar. So I thought of this like proposal so students could further like fortify those habits and train their taste to like these whole foods in childhood and carry those habits throughout life. And a lot of research shows that children who eat healthy as children, they end up carrying those habits throughout life. So that's what pushed me to write the article and write the proposal.
So just paint a picture, give us an example. So as you were growing up, you mentioned that some of your peers would eat 2/3 of their meals, like you said, at the school, but it always wouldn't be the healthiest option. So just give us an example of what was offered to them.
I do remember it was a lot of chips, a
Hmm.
lot of like fried chicken, for example, Tyson, a lot of like white bread, peanut butter, and jellies, but the jelly would typically be very loaded with sugar, a lot of like white material that would like spike your blood sugar. So, like in the chicken pot pie, for example, it would also taste very much extremely, extremely salty.
Hmm.
And I later learned that this is because a lot of federal bills for school lunches end up going to big companies such as Tyson and Lay's in order to make the school lunches look more like this. So in summary, that is what I would say like an average school lunch tended to look like from what I recall.
And you also mentioned that a lot of the labeling can be misleading. And you also told a story in your article about your friend's mother being misled by some of these food labels. So go into a little bit more detail in terms of how this food marketing can eventually lead to widespread consumption of these ultra processed foods. And obviously, that's not going to lead to healthy outcomes as well.
So to go into a little bit more depth with that, there's also several articles published by, I think it's the Harvard School of Public Health on this topic exactly. But a lot of food companies, especially recently. So, for example, I was walking through the store the other day, and there was this lemonade mix, and it said high in vitamin C.
Mm.
And I turned it around, and it said like per serving, it was something about like 30 or 36 grams of added sugar, which I believe on the average day, a adult female is not supposed to exceed 25 grams of added sugar.
Hmm.
But I looked to the vitamin C section and it said 10%. Well, I'm not sure like what the average person would think like rich in vitamin C means, but 10% seems very, very low.
Hmm.
Harvard's also published several articles on this saying there's not a lot of legal requirements for like what meets like high in vitamin C, low in sugar. So I believe that also tends to mislead people a lot.
So you proposed the American Farm and School Nutrition Support Act. So tell us a little bit more about what that entails.
So I've definitely stepped a little bit away from like proposing an act directly because this process is a lot more complicated than what I originally thought it was going to be. I never had a formal class on policy, but I ended up doing some research, especially over spring break. And I thought back to those lunch trays and I was like, where is the money for example, the National School Lunch program, like where like what companies is it exactly going to? And I thought like what if that could be reallocated to local farmers?
Hmm.
So I drafted that proposal out since I kind of been tapping into this issue for years using a lot of peer reviewed research, but I've shifted a little bit from that. And I'm currently reaching out to people who have had their boots on the ground in this field for years. So for example, there's the Arkansas food bank that has employees that go to Washington, D.C. to like lobby for a SNAP. I've met with some people who've said like this can maybe a bit be woven into maybe something for SNAP or GusNIP. Are you familiar with what GusNIP is?
Yeah, for those listeners who aren't, just tell us what SNAP and GusNIP are.
So SNAP is basically like food stamps where it varies on the degree in which people use them, but it's where you get these tickets for like for example like discounted or free food. So GusNIP is basically where you get these tickets for discounted healthy locally purchased food.
Hmm.
So I've heard that this proposal could potentially be woven into that, but there's a lot of like nuances and things that I just like wasn't aware of. Like there are people who spend years in like a little tiny part of like any type of advocacy field and they'll dig and dig and dig for like years that they're asked like why did this good idea not work, because there's a lot going on under the hood that a lot of people including myself don't realize.
Hmm.
So it's really important to ask the questions of like why did this work, why did this not work. So a lot of laws that are actually passed, if you look on like bill trackers, they'll amend like these tiny little parts of these like laws and acts, and the act will be something like 2,000 pages, and they'll amend just that
Mhm.
like one thing. And that's most of the time like where progress kind of goes and where it begins, as opposed to like a big sweeping change.
So tell us about some of the paths forward in terms of what you would like to see done after talking to some of the advocates in this area. What are some actionable steps forward that you'd like to see happen?
I'm very much in the learning stage of this. So I am meeting with some people who work for the Seeds program in Vermont, which is like a farm to school program, which basically facilitates the purchasing of local, typically healthier foods from like local farmers, and they make it onto the lunch tray. Realistically, what could happen is I may have to go to like a more like local level, and like
Mhm.
for example, like even working with like one school in Arkansas about like maybe having like a gardening program. The kids like grow the vegetables and they end up on the school lunch tray, since there is a wealth of evidence to suggest that children who grow like certain types of like crops end up on the lunch tray. They end up consuming more vegetables and fruits
Mhm.
at school and at home. So change could be extremely like local, but I guess getting any type of progress on the federal level can sometimes be a massive stretch, and it's also a little bit of luck too. So it could depend on like what legislative vehicles happen to be going through at the time. But I am trying to reach out to Feeding America, and I think the U.S. Farm Bureau as well about this, to see where it can go, and anything they're currently like working on or potentially could be attached to.
So you are a first year medical student, so you're just starting your medical journey. So as a future physician, tell us about some of the ways that you think that you could influence food policy. Do you have any ideas during your start of your medical education journey where you certainly can influence this issue from that perspective?
Patient stories and patient observation definitely go a very long way, as and having an open mind as well, because sometimes like the like research and like what you see with your own eyes like may like neither are like wrong, but like one may not be covered in like the other field. Really like learning from that, and also seeing the way that my patients could potentially like understand like what the idea of healthy is. And same with me too, since like eating healthy, maintaining a healthy lifestyle is like it's a lifelong journey, not just something you can learn in like one afternoon. Probably like weaving that into the policy too. Another thing too is I've learned in this field is that personal stories from people you've treated, from people who have passed away, those could also be extremely powerful in this field. And having a story in politics definitely can take you a very long way. As far as on the personal level, I'm an aspiring psychiatrist, but I view it through the osteopathic lens, which is that mind, body, and spirit are forever connected. And if like one is off, the others could also be influenced as well.
Mhm.
And there's also a growing amount of research to suggest that people who have healthy diets tend to have better mental health. So also like working with my patients. So for a example, if they can't afford like maybe like the more traditional healthy options, because a lot of stores have marketing campaigns where they'll put like for example like chopped watermelon in pretty little plastic bowls and covers in like the front of the store, because it's the first
Mhm.
thing that you tend to see, and the hoping that you'll buy it, so they'll raise the price up. But it won't be as cheap as for example the bag of black beans that are on the bottom shelf in the back corner of the store. So even just little things like that can really make a difference within somebody's life, but also to approach it from a non-judgmental perspective and realize that no type of sense is really like common. So in summary, that's probably what I would do.
Do you have any nutritional education in medical school? I hear a lot of times that that is one of the areas that is lacking in medical education, basic nutritional knowledge or how to advocate for nutrition or teaching physicians in general more about better nutrition. Anything like that that you've experienced?
So my school does a very good job at like teaching like how to read a food label correctly and how to like not or a better job than most schools on how to like not be like thrown off by those
Hmm.
advertising labels that could be like technically true, but there's a bunch of other like bad things that override the good in the background. People I've spoken to at other schools seem to not get this level of nutritional education, but I've only spoken to probably like people from 4 other schools.
Hmm.
And I'll have to admit, I haven't read a lot of the research on it. So I'm not sure like what it's like at other schools. But I will say a lot of the nutritional stuff that I know, I taught myself. So like for example, how much saturated fat, like how long the list of chemicals should
Hmm.
roughly be, and a general rule that my mother taught me since she's always been into nutrition and working out. I also worked as a wellness coach, which is kind of like a step down from a personal trainer, is unless it has a lot of like animal fat in it, stick to what God made. Like
Hmm.
that was the quote that my mom always told me. And in general, the outskirts of the store. So typically, the closer the way it is to its like natural state, typically the more healthy it's going to be.
Now, what about those other medical students or physicians who want to be involved from a policy aspect when it comes to addressing food insecurity? You've been involved in this field, so what kind of tips do you have for them?
So a lot of times change and getting involved can look very, very, very small, but it has a massive impact behind the scenes that you may not see. So for example, you can volunteer at a food pantry. I did that in 2 separate states during COVID. That definitely taught me a lot. It could also just be as simple as like reaching out to the principal of a certain school with, you could say, I have this idea for a garden that they could grow sweet peas in, for example, and that could end up on lunch lunch tray. Would you guys be open to exploring that idea more? You can also find a lot of articles online of people who have done the same thing, especially if it's from like a .org or like a more credible website. It could start as that. It could also be into like them educating their patients on how to eat healthier in like in a way that's very comprehensible to them. So like teaching people to advocate for themselves. They could also like pass it along to their families or anyone that they happen to know. So a lot of times change like starts on a very seemingly small level. There's a lot of impact it could have that you'll just never see.
We're talking to Scarlett Saitta. She's an osteopathic medical student. Today's Kevin MD article is "The School Cafeteria Could Save American Medicine." Scarlett, let's end with some take-home messages that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience.
The only take home message I can think of off the top of my head now is basically a lot of things that I've already said. Is you may not think that you're making a sweeping change, but a big change even be something like a student choosing an apple over applesauce, which has to have a
Hmm.
lot more like added sugar, because from a humbling perspective you taught them to eat like the closest form that it was to on the branch, on the bush, or in the ground, and them kind of making those decisions repeatedly throughout their life, which ends up giving them better mental health and better longevity. So that was probably a big take home message from that.
Scarlett, thank you so much for sharing your perspective and insight. And thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Dr.